Thank you. Now that we have started recording the session, let me remind you all that the Stewards General Assembly is when the members of the network act as decision makers. As you know, the network is composed by the stewards, and when they gather together in the general meeting, they decide on the general mission and strategies of the network. So this is one of the key moments of our meetings, because you become legislators or you become leaders taking decisions about the network. So that's a very first point to keep in mind. As you remember, the GIF network has three main bodies: the General Assembly, which is the main body in charge of directing our mission and our strategic plans. Then we have the lead stewards, the governing board of the network, to which I report as director of the network. The governing board is in charge of accepting new members and on sanctioning, monitoring, and supporting the executive plans of the network. And the third body is the coordination team, which I am honored to lead, composed by our colleagues that we early mentioned. So in our role as an assembly, we will address three main points. The first one, and I'm changing here the order, is going to be the principles on transparency of tax policy and as administration. These principles were presented, you might remember, online as a draft version 1 year ago. After that, we went over several consultations at country level and global consultations. We got feedback from practically all of our lead stewards, the IMF, IBP, the World Bank, the OECD provided very detailed feedback, other colleagues and organizations. And now we are very happy to present the final version of the tax principles. As we know, principles are always work in progress, but we would like you to today consider this as the last version, so we can start in a new phase for dissemination and use at national level these principles. So that's the first point. On the second point, we will talk about the new members of the network. We are very pleased to have the applications of Guanajuato, the state of Guanajuato, state in Mexico, the municipality of Musulgetti in the Guria region in Georgia, and also Liberia, the Republic of Liberia. In the case of Musulgetti, it has been a municipality that was recommended by the Ministry of Finance and Europe Foundation's 2 members of the network. In the case of Guanajuato, we have been working with them, and you'll see how outstanding their work on fiscal transparency and participation. And in the case of Liberia, we have also been working with them. So in all cases, they comply with the logics of becoming new members. We're gonna get to know them today. And if the Assembly recommends their integration, I'm gonna take the case to the lead stewards in a very formal but and procedural step to sanction and officialize their integrations as new members. And finally, we are going to briefly present a 3-year work plan, the coordination team, myself, for your considerations for the gift network. All of that in a little bit more than 90 minutes. So let us start, and let me make sure that we have the presentation that we needed. We are ready now. Perfect. So again, I'm very pleased to present the last version or the final version of the gift principle, transparency principle, the tax transparency principles of the gift network, which was in this last version elaborated by Professors Richard Murphy and Andrew Baker. They are joining us from England. They are based at the University of Sheffield. The first version came basically out from a compendium that they made on how to analyze tax systems. That compendium was presented 1 year ago. It's called Making Tax Work. After that, we worked on the principles. The consultation that I already mentioned took place, and our colleagues in England have put together this last version. It was distributed to your emails beforehand. I hope you had a chance to take a look at it, but let us hear Professors Murphy and Baker on this last version to your consideration. Richard, Andrew, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. I think I'm going to try to share my screen with the Zoom audience if I can. So I shall try to do that. Hang on a second, bear with me. And
it's working.
It's working, yeah. I'm going to try to get it onto. That's better. Right, okay, that's working now, and everybody can hopefully see that okay.
But yeah, we can see it. The technical team is working on it.
Okay, that's great. This is the third time Richard and I have spoken at the GIFT annual stewards meeting, so we're in danger of becoming an annual fixture. We're both very sorry that we can't be there in person with you, but for personal reasons, it hasn't been practical or possible for either of us to travel, but we're very happy to contribute and communicate with you via the technology, obviously. I'm going to see if I can put on. So I'm going to start off by saying something about the process that Juan Pablo referred to there. The principles began life literally as a list of 10 one-line bullet points that Richard and I drew out of that Making Tax Work document. And at that point, they were really intended to be little more than a conversation starter, the start of a process of developing a set of principles for tax transparency. From there, GIFT evolved that initial list into 14 principles that were presented to last year's GIFT stewards meeting. And over the course of the last year, as Juan Pablo alluded to, there's been a consultation process with written comments received from organizations from 7 countries, including Kenya, Philippines, United States, Croatia, Argentina, South Africa, and Guatemala, and from the OECD governance team and the International Budget Partnership. Richard and I, in turn, have presented aspects of the principles and aspects of Making Tax Work about half a dozen times over the course of the last year, and have extracted plenty of verbal feedback from that. And we have then worked with GIFT to develop a response to all of those comments, and we've tried to incorporate as many of them as possible into the final document. Before talking specifically about what we've changed over the course of the last year, I wanted to offer a brief reflection on that process. And I think above all else, what Richard and I have learned is that writing a set of high-level general principles that are comprehensive, but also have potentially practical, useful applications is a challenging and difficult task. And out of necessity, it's also an iterative exercise that requires reflection and revision. And therefore, it's also a protracted process, and that's how it should be. The wording of the principles has to be precise and qualified, but that also has to exist at a high level of generality so that they have potential application in multiple jurisdictions. And that's a challenging task, and it takes time. But we're also very grateful to have had the opportunity to observe and participate in what has been an exemplary, inclusive and useful process that's been expertly curated by and overseen by Juan Pablo and the GIFT team. We feel very privileged to have seen that up close and been a part of it, because it has undoubtedly made the end product much stronger and much more useful, or at least we hope that is the case. Okay, so as I said, we've made 5 major changes and refinements over the course of the last year. So let me flag that first one to you. A new section explaining what their principles are, their function, how they work has been added to the start of the document. It's quite a short, concise section. It's about 1.5 pages long. And I want to draw people's attention to a couple of things coming out of that, because I think they are important. First, the principles are intended to enable a process of multi-stakeholder dialogue and how tax systems are performing and how they might be improved. So in other words, they are a reference point or benchmark for structuring discussions to that end within jurisdictions and between a jurisdiction and the international community. It will be possible, for example, to report on the extent to which a jurisdiction meets each principle and identify steps to improve that record. What the principles don't do, and this is equally as important, is provide detailed prescriptions for national legislation. They identify processes that will increase transparency in how tax is governed, managed and administered, with a view to enabling pathways to improving tax system performance to be identified through that process of enhanced transparency. And I think it's important at this point to say that nothing quite like the principles currently exists, at least from our perspective. The principles provide a robust but flexible reference point for policymakers and stakeholders in countries to develop their own frameworks for taxation with a view to improving the effectiveness of their tax systems. Now, if we look at 2 of the biggest challenges facing the world today, the cost of living crisis and rising prices, and how that widens and accentuates inequality potentially, and at the same time the need to respond to climate change, to achieve net zero and transform economies, taxation is a potential instrument for dealing and addressing with both of those challenges. But that requires societies to start thinking seriously and reflecting on how to cultivate and design their tax systems. And the principles of tax transparency are about helping with that task and that process. And in that sense, I think that both Richard and I have a view that these principles, their timing could not be more portentous or apposite. Ultimately, the reason to have the principles in existence is so that other actors will use them and apply them and find them helpful as guides for actions, as guide for action in improving national tax governance. And we've written them in collaboration with the GIFT team in the hope that they will provide such a guide or template for action. The final thing to say on this is the principles should be evolutionary. They're not going to be static. They should be reviewed periodically to keep them relevant and useful and enable them to respond to changing circumstances. The second thing we've done is we have refined and elaborated the definition of tax transparency informing this work to illustrate how it's more focused on national policies and administration than the OECD definition, which is aimed at tackling bank secrecy and tax evasion. So tax transparency in the GIFT understanding is about tracking overall tax system performance in a jurisdiction and having the information and processes in place to enable that. In fact, the OECD approach is specifically featured in what is now Principle 10 in the principles on international exchanges. But I think what that does is it illustrates the GIFT approach to tax transparency is broader than, but also complementary to the OECD approach. Thirdly, the ordering of the principles has been changed. That's the point at the bottom there on the slide, in an effort to make them easier to read and to follow, and to give their sequence a logical path of escalating demands. So in making tax work, we distinguished between basic, intermediate, advanced, and aspirational levels of transparency, noting the features of each. What we've now done is applied that categorization to each of the principles themselves. The first 6 principles are at the basic level. The next 3 are between basic and intermediate. There's 1 at intermediate level. There's 2 further at intermediate and advanced, 1 at advanced, and then the final principle is at the aspirational level. So they are presented very much as a sliding scale of ambition to be worked through and towards progressively and gradually over time. I should say that the first 3 principles all deal with making data and information available and go together. Principles 4 to 6 are about law, rights, and procedure, and likewise go together. Principles 7 and 8 return to data and information, but a slightly more demanding level, and start to move out of the basic category. Principles 9 to 10 are about more demanding forms of procedure. 11 and 12 are the beginning of a move into more sophisticated forms of data. Principle 13 is about the verification of the quality of that data. And principle 14, which is about tax gaps and tax spillover assessments, is intended to be the ultimate gold standard of tax transparency and the most demanding of the principles. And we think that order now makes sense and makes for a much easier read. So the fourth thing that we've done is that principle 13 was previously about accountability and consultation. And we know that's something that's very dear to the heart of many of those present today. But as we worked through the principles, it was clear that many earlier principles dealt with aspects of this. So what we did, therefore, was to take principle 13 and combine it with principle 11, which was on the rule of law, legal standing of the tax system, and included the need for institutionalized consultation with stakeholders and civil society in relation to substantive changes to the tax system. And we made this the new principle 4. So this was combining principle 11 and principle 13 and moving it further forward in the list of principles to principle 4. And that principle is also the first principle on legality, rights, and procedure. So combining those 2 principles in this way meant we were now down to 13 principles, but we had identified an area that wasn't covered in the existing principles, but had been mentioned in making tax work and had come up in discussions several times over the course of last year, and that was taxpayer confidentiality. So the new principle 6 establishes the basic right to taxpayer confidentiality, but also makes some basic exceptions to this, which have important transparency implications in their own right. And so they are fully specified in the accompanying discussion notes, which now accompany each of the principles. So that brings me on to this 5th point. We've added explanatory and guidance notes to inform how each principle should be read, applied, and evaluated. In some cases, this is a relatively short paragraph, but in other cases where a bit more explanation was required, there are 3 or 4 paragraphs. On principle 14, this explains how tax gap analysis.
Recording in progress.
But these 2 things go together and complement one another, with spillover assessment being the means to identify the reasons why measurable tax gaps can arise, and therefore suggest a series of measures that would help to plug the gap between possible and actual revenue recovered in a given year. So we think the principles now offer a robust framework for evaluating tax systems, enriching public debate, and as a guide or template for action to improve national tax governance and tax system performance. We hope they will be used and be useful as a reference point in the years to come. And I guess the next steps are to encourage the audience and some of the people present today to reflect on how they might be used and by whom. So that's everything I intended to say. It just remains for me to say to you all, gracias por escuchar, amigos.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you, of course.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I know Richard is with us. I know he's been dealing with health issues. Thank you, Richard, for making the effort. Let me ask. Yes, yeah, well, he said it. Yeah, we're making our best. Let me ask the floor if there are general questions about the principles that we have present to your consideration, or specific questions. The floor is open. Yes, Ricardo, and after Eco.
Gracias. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. First question, do these principles have an immediate practical application? I don't know if GIFT will prepare translation to the languages, including the Spanish. We immediately are speaking with the Deputy Minister, and we need to get in contact with the Guatemalan Association and say, hey, here you have this. We invite you to read it and adopt it as institutional principles. Thank you, Ricardo. Of course, we will translate them at least into Spanish, Portuguese, French. And I take that responsibility of having arrived here to the session without carrying out the translation. I'm sorry for that. We know most of stewards at least could be able to understand the version in English, but they will be translated at least before the end of the month in 3 languages, into the 3 languages, and as many languages as necessary. Echo.
Thank you, Professor Andrew. My name is Eko from Indonesian Ministry of Finance. Just a quick question about the principle. I just wondering, because I haven't read the principle yet. In Indonesia, in terms of the tax collection, it's all done by the system. So I believe it's quite transparent. People understand that, but however, it is still a challenge for Minister of Finance, especially. So tax is part of Minister of Finance in Indonesia. Will the principle also provide the framework on how to engage with the civil society during the planning process, the policy formulation regarding tax? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Eco. Let me remind our friends that this is really an exemplary collaborative effort. At the end, you see this document, but behind this, there is a very important collaborative effort that particularly engage the tax equity program of IBP and the global tax program of the World Bank. But at IBP, we put together a survey on how civil society uses tax information and what were the challenges that they were encountering to have tax information that was really meaningful and useful for them to use and analyze. And I believe that one of the case studies is particularly Indonesia, because I remember speaking with Indonesian civil society organizations about their tax work. Warren can maybe refer more precisely to the example. The principles refer to the need of consultation, and they elaborate a little bit on the basic elements of such a consultation. But I would be very pleased to take that principle to Indonesia with the tax authorities, your colleagues, of the revenue side of the ministry and explore in Indonesia what would be the best way to come about with such a principle. We did it in the Philippines and it was very, very useful. So, colleagues, what I'm asking you, most of you representatives of expenditure side of the Ministry of Finance, is to, just as Ricardo has kindly offered with Violeta, to take back these principles to your countries and talk to the revenue side of your ministries, letting them know that we are ready to speak with them and present the principles to their consideration. Andrew, Richard, I am sure you have something to say to these questions and comments.
If I might, we built the standards on the basis that a government needs to state the principles that it is going to use to guide its tax system. So we start right at the beginning by saying that is where a government should begin to engage with its population. Why is it taxing? What is it trying to achieve as a result? What outcomes does it expect? And that doesn't just need to be about revenue, because as Andrew's already said, there can be very strong social and economic implications in the way in which a tax system is designed. So those need to be specified as well. And we suggest that every government should every year revisit these and open those objectives for consultation and have a debate with people who want to engage to say, are these appropriate? But then we go on to explain, and this is the accountant in me, I think, a little bit coming out here, saying, look, then explain what that turns out to mean in practice. You've got to set a budget, and many, well, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that process, but particularly on the expenditure side. But this requires a budget to be set on the revenue side in sufficient detail that we can understand how taxes will be raised, on what, which taxes, who is expected to pay, how many people might be expected to pay. Now, this goes into increasing depth, and that's one of the things that is very important to the whole of these principles. You can start at one level and you can build up the level of detail over time. Critically, we aren't asking for anything which is an impossible standard to achieve for some places, some countries, some municipalities, whoever, at the outset of the process. This builds. But the intention is to provide enough information to then inform a process of feedback. Why didn't the plans turn out? What can we learn from what happened? How can we improve the process? Were we realistic? Do we need another objective, and so on? So this is very much a process of learning by iteration, but that's what the whole thing is trying to encourage. Stating plans, stating intentions, learning from the process of accounting for what actually happens, then moving on to start the whole budget cycle all over again and improving, because that is the ultimate goal. There is no right or wrong answer here. There are simply better answers, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
The two principles that deal most directly with this specific area are Principle 4.
Can't hear you, Andrew.
We hear you, Andrew.
Principle 4 and Principle 9. Principle 4 is about consultation mechanisms prior to a substantive change in tax policy or administration being arrived at. And Principle 9 is about accountability mechanisms that reflect on past performance. And what there are now in the principles are a series of kind of guidance notes around how each of those principles should be read and applied and evaluated. I have to confess to something here, which is that you will find that the notes are written at a degree of generality, and that is deliberate, because we don't want the principles to be read in such a way that it says a particular jurisdiction has to do it this particular way. The principles are written in such a way that they provide leeway for individual administrations and national authorities to find their own pathways that are most appropriate for their particular specific sets of circumstances. But I guess what I'd encourage people to do is have a read of those guidance notes and start to see how they apply in their own particular experience or jurisdiction. Because that's the whole purpose and intent of the exercise, really, I guess.
there is also making tax work to refer back to being updated in a sense by the principles we're now discussing, which aren't in there because they've developed since we wrote it. But there are a lot of examples and approaches which are discussed in making tax work which would help. But again, don't presume that's definitive. That's just a way of looking at some of these issues. There will be others, and we're well aware of that.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I know ASIG from Argentina, like many others organizations, civil society organizations here present, like CIEP, PISAM, Social Watch in Benin, work on tax issues. In this context, ASIG, unfortunately, they couldn't come in person, ask for a space to briefly share recent experience on the matter with the Assembly. Please, Pablo Icar.
Well, welcome back again. So fundamentally, I could say that the importance of the principles, and of course, the plan that we have in Argentina, that we are also part of the other networks in which we try to make to move forward in agreements that is the different states should come into in order to have a joint, transparent and tax policy. And we are also part of the discussion that we're taking there. So it was a principle 8 at the beginning, but maybe the order changed. Maybe this is related to the different initiatives and encouragement. So Paulo, can you hear us? So Paulo, we're making sure that your actual, because we have a simultaneous or like a technical problem here. So please retake what you were saying like 1 or 2 minutes before. And so yes, precisely, we were very interested in the support, these principles as a guide for the participation of the civil society and the participation of the government, that it should be related to the transparent fiscal transparency. We wanted to focus on the principle 8 that is related to the initiative of the and the publication of the reports regarding this issue, that in which we see that they are not being met at least in Argentina. So at least in this sense, what we see here in our country is that, as I said in the previous point, we were trying to generate the fiscal transparency principles with good results and in the terms in the legal area, and now we are waiting for it to be confirmed by the Supreme Court of our nation. So with that, we can also have like an additional step in order to move. And we are also generating a national network, and we're also working in coordination with different organizations and the academy and technical organizations, and that basically we work all together in order to have a transparent, the fiscal transparency, and in order to have these standards that at the end come into regulations. I think that it happens in some other parts or some other countries, that is basically related to the collection and the collection of the data. So without so basically, and also see how this impacts the policies that are impacting, and that also promote the different special regimes, or such as the fiscal waivers. And at the same time, we also say this because we understand that it has to go, or we need to identify the resources in order to, here we have a very important work, and in which we have also the legal work there. And we have we see that in other countries that they are working on the inclusion of tax areas, and basically see how these resources are being collected in order to exercise the different rights. And we have worked on that too. As for the monitoring and the management of state resources, we think that is very important here to make available or make these tools available that are basically to serve specific functions. And that's something that of the work that we have to do for the next years. We have the distracting activities that are happening in our country that of course are benefited from stable regimes or waivers in which we don't have too much information available, and also that the civil society can also monitor all the environmental impact created by these industries, so they can have the corresponding tools to monitor and, for example, how these resources are not being captured, and precisely that comes from those kind of companies. So those are the idea is to have our agenda with the different stakeholders from the society. And the first thing is to have the tools that that we're working from the fiscal point of view, and we want to be part of also the people that are basically claiming for a more fiscal responsibility. So this is in general terms. This is just we can see that in detail later. Thank you very much. Precisely the work that you have done so far in every area regarding the public resources management is very important, and the principles here precisely aim or refer to the work that you had in 2021 with the different organizations on legal and tax justice, and didn't mention that before, but he works in the Fundación Solidaridad or Solidarity Foundation. Here we have the same in Brazil. Inés works the same there in her country. And we also had this chat yesterday with the Ministry of Finance. And the idea that the government has is very promising in order to have a fiscal reform, but in a very deep way. In those discussions, we have a transparency scheme that in which we have an effective consultation mechanism, and that is on time, that is central. And in these discussions, I think that principles are very useful.
And now that we have the authors here, just on your reflections, because I did not see particularly on beneficial ownership, or I would like to know how you thought about this, because I'm pretty sure you thought about this at some point, and how this interacts with the principles. And the other one on the corporate minimum costs. And how do you see these principles across jurisdictions working? Maybe you gave it some thought, maybe you have not. I don't know. I would like to hear your reflections on this. Thank you.
I'm really sorry, but I didn't really.
The first question is there any relationship, or how are we taking into consideration in the principles this whole question about beneficial ownership?
Yes.
It does appear towards the end, much more than it does towards the beginning, because the first focus of the principles was on government accountability. This is a big shift in, if you like, in the thinking around tax justice. I mean, I've been involved in that now pretty much longer than anyone, having co-founded the Tax Justice Network 20 years ago with John Christensen, who has advised us on this process as well. So we should acknowledge that. But we are deliberately doing a slight shift here, away from focusing solely on the corporate sector and abuse that takes place within it. We're not saying that isn't important, but we're saying there is another dimension to tax justice which has been underplayed, which is the role of government in delivering effective and accountable tax systems. But when we come to the higher levels of the principles, when we particularly get to things like tax gaps and we get to things like tax spillovers, we're looking at the reasons why tax is not collected. And one of the reasons why tax is not collected is quite clearly because of abuse of tax systems through things like failed company registers, There's a wonderful tweet out this morning in the UK which shows that there were 30 call entries created at one address in the UK in the space of an hour today, which is almost implausible, particularly because the address in question does not exist. So we know that company beneficial registries are at the moment still really open to abuse and manipulation. So we highlight that, but towards the end of the process rather than at the beginning here. Something which is more basic is the government giving us enough information to understand the tax system as it operates. And here, let me go back to the previous comments that were made, which I really appreciate, because really what I want to draw out of that is the fact that where we want to go next, and I doubt we've got much time to discuss this now, but where Andrew and I are really keen to go is to begin to develop some understanding of how we use these principles. And we see two very specific tools coming out of them, where common experience could be developed, which would be of real benefit between us all as we go forward. And one of those tools is to appraise against the 14 principles we've now got. How far has the government gone in delivering these? And the other one, which could be done by a government, by civil society, by professions, by trade unions, is to look at, or best of all, those people in combination working together, is to look at tax spillover, which is at one level Andrew and I agree, can be done in a few hours by working with some informed people from each of those groups to come up with a pretty good impression of what the risks are within any tax system. So we're very keen to develop those tools now, because we think they will turn a set of principles into a set of practices which will then translate into something which is of benefit to everyone.
Yes, Richard. Just Andrew, briefly comment.
We were a bit constrained about what we could say in terms of the specifics of things like beneficial ownership within the actual principles themselves, because as soon as you start to say that, you're straying over into the territory of being very prescriptive. And we wanted the principles to be once you start digging in, as Richard pointed out, I think there is principle 14, which goes into spillover assessment. And one of the things you look at when you do a spillover assessment is you set is the administration of company registrations functioning effectively, and you ask a series of questions to dig into that. So what would come out of that as a form of tax transparency is a lot of information on gaps and bad performance in relation to company registration that you could then start to plug in terms of administrative resources and procedure. And so that's how the principles are almost designed to function. That they're not, in a way, they're not supposed to say, this is what needs to be done, but they're to illuminate gaps in existing practice and to allow national authorities to work out their own pathways to start plugging those practices and moving the performance of their own forward based on implementing and applying the principles and the spillover effects that are generated by that, to coin a phrase.
And importantly, we have done some demonstration studies which you see in
when we did that exercise, one of the things that emerged very strongly was how badly the UK's own form of, because we did it to the UK, we applied the spillover exercise to the UK, and the one thing that emerged was how bad the company registration, the administration of company registrations was working in the UK. The extent to which that was one of the fundamental and primary weaknesses of the UK tax system, and we wrote quite a lot about that in that particular assessment exercise.
Yes, thank you, colleagues, and we'll be happy to share those papers with the audience. Warren.
Hi, thank you both. This is Warren Krafchuk from IBP, and it's wonderful to now have a set of every side and the a question about practice. To what extent? So what does participation in tax policy look like at the moment? But then also a question in terms of potential. What's realistic and feasible and useful from the participation principles that we might apply on the tax side, given that the tax and expenditure sides are going to be different, I would expect.
Let me jump in straight away. He mentioned you the other day in conversation and said if we were to speak to you, please say hello. So that is duty done. One of the key things inside the principles is to actually appraise, for example, the consultation processes. It's really in there quite early on. You know the numbers better than I will at the moment because my brain's a bit in a fog. But the point about that is, you know, when we said that we need to appraise compliance with the principles, one of the early things would be, is there an effective consultation process? Could it be improved? How can people be encouraged to take part? Is it that they don't have resources? Should there be budgets provided to organisations who want to make commissions who don't have the funding available for them to do so? I personally think that's really quite an important process, because otherwise, as I see too often in too many consultation processes, all the comments come from professional organisations, tax lawyers and so on, and very few from civil society, because they simply don't have the resource to participate in the right way. So all of these things are things that I think we could develop, but I think we need a set of tools to translate now in this area what the principle says into what the practice should be. And I think there is simply a mapping exercise to go on. To work out how we do move from a set of principles on participation to a set of principles on consultation, to align with each other. It's not completely simple, but I think it's an important next stage.
The one thing I would flag on this is that I mentioned the 10 bullet points that we started off. We wrote a document, Making Tax Work, which was over 100 pages long, and then we tried to extract the principles out of it. But what we did to aid us in that process was we went and looked at the principles on the expenditure side, and we said, how would they translate into a comparable set of principles on the revenue side and for tax without replicating what's already in place? So we tried to do, so we actually, in a way, that was a starting point. What we haven't done is look at that in terms of participation principles, and I guess that would be, you know, that would be an interesting thing. We'll start to do that next. My guess would be, given that I think the principles now how they relate on the expenditure side, they would be kind of complementary, but on the revenue side, that you would actually see a similar pattern starting to emerge on the participation side as well. But it would be interesting to to work through how they dovetail, reinforce one another, but actually go off and do slightly different things that are useful in their own right.
Thank you, colleagues. So it is work in progress. Sorry that we now have to move on to the next topic. And to my perspective, the importance of producing the high-level principles on fiscal transparency, accountability, and participation back in 2012. Then in 2015, the principles for public participation in fiscal policies. Those very important contributions of the GIF network to the global architecture of fiscal transparency, I believe is now strengthened, reinforced by these tax principles. The participation principles might be very useful once we have a government who is open to have a serious consultation about the tax system, and then participation principles which apply to fiscal policy in general might establish very useful normative settings for such a dialogue, including the principle of inclusiveness, openness, accessibility, and others. But it's true, as my colleagues just said, this is something that we still need to test, practice, learn from, and share. But to settle the discussion, dear colleagues, and take into consideration the of putting together the final version of the tax principles as a tool for dialogue and practice at a national level, let me ask the Assembly if there are any objections to the GIF network starts using that version of the principles as the final one. Are there any objections? Thank you, colleagues. With that, I assume that this final version is approved. We will work with it. We will translate it before and anything else, and we will keep you posted. Congratulations, we have new principles. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, Richard, Pablo. Muchas gracias. Now on membership and our network becoming stronger and enlarged. As Warren said, we've seen many opportunities for ministers of finance talking and working with civil society on fiscal transparency ambitious goals as potential members. Usually, it takes some collaboration, some partnership for us to get to know a country, Ministry of Finance, their civil society budget organizations. And once we have an ongoing relationship, they are invited or they take the initiative to present their application. This has been the case of Liberia. At the last moment, Johnson, Deputy Minister Johnson is our main relationship colleague, but the Deputy Minister Bronson were to come. They couldn't make it, but they presented their application. I circulated the application, and we've been working with Liberia, particularly on the Fiscal Accelerator project, the IBP gift project on public participation mechanisms in the budget process. You've seen Johnson Williams in many of our meetings. He was in Brazil. That was the first meeting in which he came along. And they've been doing, although they started a little bit slow on the fiscal transparency, Fiscal Accelerator project, and now they really put the accelerator down, and they're making significant progress on fiscal transparency. They improved significantly on the open budget survey, and they have already designed a public participation mechanism, and they're planning to implement it this fiscal year. So with all of those conditions, of course, our recommendation to the lead stewards is for them to formally become members. We couldn't have the lead stewards meeting before this meeting. We will have it, but I wanted to inform the good news to the General Assembly that Liberia has presented their formal application to become members. Another important trend that we discussed last year and that we have been trying to put into place after that has been accepting candidatures, applicants from local governments. The first and a very exciting case was of Bogota, and look, colleagues, how quickly that membership gave us fruit and returns because of their generosity in hosting us in their city. And you'll see tomorrow they'll share proudly their experience. But after that, lead stewards and the coordination team work on some criteria to invite other local governments. One of them was to have members of the network recommending new local governments to become members, or as said before, having already an ongoing relationship with them, a trustful relationship that allows us to know that they're really committed to fiscal transparency and participation. In the latter, Guanajuato, federal state of Mexico, has presented the application, and I'm very happy to invite Erica to take the floor. On the other case, Ministry of Finance of Georgia and Europe Foundation presented the candidature, the application of Musulgetti Municipality in Georgia, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, Erica, the floor is yours.
Hola, muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. For me, here for the first time, along with
Can I introduce myself?
we come
Hello.
from Guanajuato State, from Mexico. Recently, we have been working for 2 years with GIFT, along with Juan Pablo Aura. Thank you very much for the support, Lorena. Also working with GIFT, and it's been a challenge for Guanajuato. Since it is subnational, it is a bigger challenge. It doesn't have the support of from a country to go up front in the results as a country like Mexico, but it is also enriching to be subnational because we do not close the doors to be able to deliver to the citizenship and make our space from our knowledge to provide with data to serve the citizenship. A moment ago, I talked to Sunik and Lorena about the importance, not only about the importance of data being in the platform, but it is also important for the citizenship to know about them. For example, social media, the news. We receive a lot of information that places us in a starting point on where is the true, real information. To have access to such information allows the citizenship to empower, assess, and be part of the decisions of the budget that is being allocated for each of the budgets. So to be able to be accountable to the citizenship in language that is inclusive, accessible, that allows us to reach more people. Last year, we had a very important experience with our first data set for university students, and two things is that it was a very nice experience because we realized that the portal that we are putting for the citizenship is at the reach of its citizens, specialized or not. They have access to be to assess the public expenditure. Something important that we see in Guanajuato, it is not so much of the financial collection, but where is going, how we are monitoring, how we are assessing the results that it is generating this public expenditure to the benefit of the citizenship. So $10, 10 pesos, they are not so much significant. So how many supports, the benefits of the roads for you as a company owner, because you will have more communication, how many schools are closing that education gap, decreasing the student quitting. So we want to provide with a different emphasis, not to see just numbers, facts, reports, but we see benefits, access, quality structure. At least in Guanajuato, we be able to show the liquidity of the state to carry out a new project, because if the standard part is covered, it allows us to innovate to new borders, new projects. The main international qualifiers have very good position. The liquidity of Guanajuato, the National Institute of Access of Public Information has awarded our portal of open budget that will turn 2 years as a tool of citizenship and empowering other institutions. The transfers of attachments, and this allows us to access publications such as the CEPAL or European Union that allows us to say Guanajuato is trying to do things best way possible, but it is providing with accessible results to citizens that allows us to assess, improve, and close the breach between the government and the citizen, to close precisely, to join, make a bridge, to assess, propose, consolidate subnational budget. That it is a step to contribute to the transparency of a country. So thank you very much for the opportunity, for the support that we had on behalf of the gift. We are willing to continue with the actions, and we would like to see each other in Guanajuato. With all the pleasure to be with you there. Thank you, Erika. How well you describe the finances here, the approach between the government and the citizens at a national level? We know the experience of peer countries who are doing very well in the budget experience. The national governments, we have a lot to learn from out of the experience and participation at a local level.
Have the finance secretary of the municipality of Musulgetti join us. Is he online or we lost him? He is online. Let me ask if he is willing to take the floor.
How you heard? Yes, how you heard me?
Head of Financial Department. We're not expecting a presentation. We would love you to address the network and say hello.
First of all, I want to thank you all members, the stewards, and to Mr. Juan Pablo Guerrero. And it's so important for us to become a member of Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, and my great respect to all involved members. And it's so important for us that we are a country for many years democracy, and we would work much to become very to become democracy. And it's so important for us use of the budget process and public participations in the budget process, and it would be great to share your achievements and also talk about our results. Our democracy is over 30 years old. Georgia is ancient country with a big history, but our democracy is not so long, and it's very important for us, so experienced members from experienced members to sharing your experience, and it's very important for us, and we are looking forward to become members of Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are honored by your presence. We know it is late, night time in Musulgetti, so thank you for staying for this meeting. We know your democracy is young, but we also know that your commitment to democracy is very strong. It is values and culture as a country, and we also know that there is much to learn from you for your passion, your commitment, and new ways of public participation that you have been developing in your municipality. So welcome, and again, thank you for your time. Your candidature has been endorsed by the Ministry of Finance of Georgia and Europe Foundation, and we are sure, and I was just talking with my good friend, Vice Minister Jose Rigo, and Rafael, General Director of the Budget in the Dominican Republic, about the great opportunity to extend this knowledge to local governments. So we will see you soon. I see my friend Victor.
Thank you very much.
How are you? Thank you, Victor. I believe that we also have from the municipality of Bogotá a colleague who's willing to address the floor. ¿Está lista la persona de Bogotá? Patricia Rincón. Well, this is sí, Patricia. She's ready. Adelante, Patricia. These are marvels and the excesses of technology. She's like 3 blocks away, but for work engagement, she came, she hugged us all, and then she went back. Patricia, bienvenida.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. I'm sorry because I couldn't join in person. We are working in the union negotiation in Bogota. I am the delegate of the mayor on the table, so I couldn't be with you. Yes, we will be happy if you join. From the mayor's office, we appreciate gift as considering Bogota as part of this network for carrying out the 2022 Steward meeting in Bogota. You are welcome this opportunity anytime you want to visit. We cities perform the management of territorial resources. Those are not minimum amounts in the public budgets of the nations. In the case of Colombia, the national budget has a similar level to the sum of all the regional budgets. According to the data of the National Controller's Office, in the case of Bogota, for example, the budget of the city is 10% of the budget of the nation. That is why it is important for us, the nationals, to be part of a network like this, where we have the opportunity to strengthen the budget processes, the collection of resources, the handling of debt to deliver goods and services to the citizens. In the case of Bogota, I've brought 2 slides. Let me try to share them, if possible. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Sí, sí la veo.
One of the things that we did in the city of Bogota was to align our development plan to the SDGs. The first part of this plan is how, with the participating process, where we heard all the citizens from the district secretary of planning, the needs of the citizens and how this city was projected to 2030. We had a marvelous event with kids who helped us think and see the city they thought of when they were adults. Additionally, in that planning with a gift strategy, we have organized and supported actions and areas to use open data. We wanted to work with GIFT to be able to count on the portal of open data, bogota.com, that you will know in the following days. The plan from the district secretary of planning will be able to show and share with you all these 3 days the participating budgets of the Secretary of Government, where the communities have made decisions. So what we have done on behalf of our fiscal transparency is to align our decision to the SDGs, open a lot more data, and they are open in 2 lines, open data for public that is for sure specialized, but additionally, the use of data and figures, pictures for citizens. We have included accountability with focused on gender. Additionally, from the Women Secretariat, we are building a marker, a budget marker. According to this decision, tomorrow we're going to be to the Secretary of Government on how we manage participative budget and we allow the city to stand for those projects that are more important for the community, as for example, parks is what is most requested and co-living. Additionally, to move forward regarding the social control, we have opened from the mayor's office, from the general secretary, the data of the projects of investment for the city, which we're going to share with you tomorrow. We are going to work on the use of data on behalf of the citizens, and for us, we are proud. It is a challenge to belong to the network because it motivates us to invest on social programs in the benefit of the citizenship of the citizens. Tomorrow, we are going to have a tour in Ciudad Bolívar to show you how the use of public resources is more than data and how it impacts the life of the citizens. We're going to go to a community that is vulnerable. We're going to see the social investments we have performed. We're going to have a tour on infrastructure and mobility, the social point of care of citizens, and the building of the care block that Bogota has performed a system per blocks that covers the city. For us, it's been very productive to belong to this network, to share with you the experiences that allows us to use better the public resources. And all along these days, we're going to share with you the progress of the fiscal control of the mayors, the budget of the Secretary of the Government, and budget on towns, also the Secretary of Planning, and everything that has to do with the mega projects and investment works of the city of Bogota. Thank you very much. Deputy Secretary Patricia Rincon, wish you luck in the negotiations that will bring about the budget health too of the city. We hope to see you this afternoon and for sure tomorrow, because we are going to have the tour that we pointed out. Thank you very much. A round of applause for her.
And I'm going to ask now for 10 more minutes of your precious time, and after that it's lunch time here next door, but you can take a break, go to your rooms. And let me ask now the wonderful gift coordination team to come and join me for the presentation of our 3 years outline for a strategic plan well, the background of this, we usually have a yearly work plan that we present and discuss with the lead stewards. In our last lead stewards meeting, we were asked to use more of a longer term proposal. And this is the proposal that we have to your consideration. You will see that it follows pretty much the trends and work streams that we have been working on to date. We are happy to share with you, get your comments, your feedbacks, and with that, go to the lead stewards again for their discussion and approval. So, Raquel, you've been working. Poor Raquel, Aura, and Jan, they almost didn't sleep to get this wonderful room together, working as well as it has. So I'm so grateful. But now, again, I ask you to lead our job.
So this is yours.
Yeah, but, well, you want me to do it? Okay, so, well, basically taken care of, because we've talked about the tax transparency principles. It follows a line of the GIFT network to producing principles after discussions, consultations, experts, feedbacks, and different collaborations. So we have been discussing with international financial institutions and IBP the production of guidelines or principles for transparency in emergencies, having in mind very strongly the COVID experience. But as we know, because of climate change, there might be other, unfortunately, but there will be other emergencies, and we would like to have clarity on what government should do in order to ensure transparency, fiscal transparency, and what could be a more active role from international financial institutions. As you know, in many of our countries, the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank helped during the emergencies, and in any case, they pushed for a transparency agenda, as Linda was mentioning in his intervention. But if we could have a more systematized and engaged stance in this, we would be grateful. And that's something we are continuing to work basically with the leadership of IBP and IMF. We will now, after the approval, work on disseminating, translating the tax transparency principles. And we would like, in the next 3 years, start discussing and elaborating on the development of new principles and guidelines for inclusive development budgeting. What many of you are talking about, how to link budget data to development objectives in a systematic way. The experience that you have in Argentina or in Colombia is, or in Mexico, is needed strongly in many other countries. And we would like, within the network, to start working on principles with this subject. Let's see the next slide. So we have three main areas of work, as you know: global norms, capacity building, peer learning, and then consolidating the network. And I'm describing now the advancing transparency and public participation in fiscal policies, and it takes us to the normal, the global work on norms. And now I finally pass the microphone.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Under the first impact work stream of GIFT on advancing transparency and public participation, we're also going to work more and further enhance technical assistance to different countries on the design and implementation of public participation mechanisms in the budget process. Now, I think in the past 2 years, we have been working on the GIFT and IBP Fiscal Openness Accelerator project on 5 selected African nations, namely Benin, Liberia, Nigeria, South Africa, and Senegal. But in the next few years, we hope to further expand and deepen this process in some specific countries by securing more core funding for this project, hopefully working with more development agencies to specifically push forward public participation mechanisms in more countries, specifically in Guatemala and Liberia and others. Also, we hope to provide and continue providing technical assistance to selected countries and to members of our network who are also part of the Open Government Partnership and who has commitments on fiscal openness under their Open Government Partnership National Action Plan. Now, I think I'll pass the floor to Aura.
Very quick, yes. Thank you, Marianne. So also in our core work stream about advancing transparency and fiscal policies, we are advancing innovative approaches for inclusive budgets and development. For this, we have several cooperation partners such as UNICEF, UNDESA, to promote the sustainable development goals embedded in the budget. So right now we're working in partnership with those to provide SDG tagging and cross-cutting development objectives embedded methodologies in several countries, including Egypt and Lesotho. And we are also collaborating with UNDESA by the provision of documented experiences on budget system reform tools and SDG correlation. We are also happy to say that we are also involving now with Colombia UNDP for this process as well. So we will be very happy to have many of you also interested in this new work stream that we are working with. And with that, I ask the next slide to be presented. Also, as you know, we have worked for a number of years in the user engagement initiatives, the Better Budget Data Quest and the public infrastructure, previously called Data on the Streets, now Data Rally from Home. In some countries such as Chile, they have already went back to the streets. So we're happy to have more countries participating in this. We'll have a specific session on this on Thursday, listening to global leaders from several countries. So very much in line with our listen to the demand motto, on Thursday we will listen to those that have demanded and have had some results on it. I think this is now for Raquel.
Thank you very much, Aura. So you may have heard that we launched the Fiscal Transparency for Development online course during July. The course is really targeted at everyone that wants to know more about fiscal transparency. So really, it's approach about fiscal transparency, and for the more advanced user it's also very useful because it packages the different themes within fiscal transparency together. It also provides references to more advanced readings, and importantly it provides field examples from fiscal transparency champions from all over the world that show how they advance fiscal transparency in their countries. So, for example, we've got Ricardo here that gave us a brilliant field example on Guatemala. Thank you, Ricardo, again. We've got Sukizwa that gave us an example from South Africa on developing Vulekamali, the South African portal. So that's the great advantage of the course, is that it brings this theoretical content together with practical information. So we believe that can inspire new champions to come to light and advance transparency in their countries. So really, if you know people in the Ministry of Finance in government, in civil society, the Supreme Audit Institution, parliamentary finance committees, really anyone who wants to know about fiscal transparency, they can sign up for the course. It is a free resource. It is self-paced, so they can just come onto the GIS website, sign up when they'd like, do 5 modules, and have all the information at their fingertips. Thank you, Nick.
How many students we have now in the program?
Oh, so since we launched about 2 weeks ago, we've already got about 50 students that have enrolled. We've also got 1 student that has actually finished the course. And the students that we had a pilot phase as well, that took the course, and they all thoroughly enjoyed the course. I think it really, it's because it caters to all different levels. So it doesn't matter if you don't know what the definition of fiscal transparency, all the way to the advanced person who just wants to read more about fiscal transparency. Yes. So currently it's available in English and French. So you can just sign on in those languages. And we are planning to make it available also in Spanish, of course, Arabic and Portuguese, for those participants that are more comfortable in these languages to be able to take the course. If you want any more information on the course, please feel free to approach me at any time over the next 3 days, and I'll happily provide more information. Thank you. Right. So GIFT is also continuing to support different countries in disclosing budget information in open formats. For instance, in the Open Fiscal Data Package. And GIFT is also doing further analysis and exploring data from the public finance module of the Global Data Barometer that you're going to hear a lot about in another session during the course of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Finally, in order to be able to do all this, we need to make sure that we can call Guatemala, and they'll be there to come to another country and share their experience as they have, or Argentina. We're working with them to put together a very interesting and rich course on targeting development objectives in the budget with Egypt, as mentioned, and go to Benin to witness their use of their mobile budget information device, and how is this helping the Ministry of Finance to get closer to budget information users. So we absolutely need to have your engagement, your commitment to continue sharing experience and learning from others, your commitment to fairness, to share when we make mistakes and how we learn from them, all of that we have been able to ensure in our dialogue. And it's very much the core value of our network. It's membership, which includes, of course, Washington, D.C. based international budget organizations or financial institutions. We are also, as explained, in the process of expanding to local governments, and we are open to eventually have another body who is very engaged in the process, the budget process, to come closer to the GIFT network and share their experience, such as Supreme Audit Institutions, committees from the Parliament, or fiscal institutions. You might remember Janet van Waldenworth. She has now become a member of the fiscal commission or institution in Chile, and she couldn't make it to this meeting, although she was, of course, invited because she is in her the first induction meetings of the council, and she said, one of the first things I'm going to tell the council is we should become members of the network. Why not? If we know that fiscal councils play such an important role in the accountability budget systems. This is something that I put on the table, but it's something that we will decide, obviously, as a network. And this is our third main core area of work, making sure that this network functions as a collaborative one in which we ensure our main objectives as far as members is concerned, and that is that when you are pushing the agenda of fiscal transparency and accountability and transparency, and you feel that all the obstacles are against you, and you feel that this is an impossible task, you don't feel alone, because the GIFT network is with you. Thank you. With that, I think we're ready to go to I don't know, you might have questions. Thank you. The questions might be on what's for lunch. Any questions, comments, always welcome. Sí, Suni.
Tengo dos preguntas.
I have two questions. One is if you have measured the impact of these activities that we have carried out jointly of citizen participation in some countries. I know the final outcomes of that through the years that we have implemented. That is one question. The other question is, well, thinking of the GIFT network, I think there is a request, demand, increasing demand of these kinds of information. I don't know if all some entities are welcome to participate. I don't know if this is the moment or if we are going to welcome them.
On the sector, private sector question, it's been a challenge now. And I think it will be a traditional challenge in this sector in which I have some white hair now in my head. So if we find out the formula to motivate the private sector to have a position, an open one, in order to push these topics, and of course we will follow you, we will support you, and with this idea and initiative, because the problem with the private sector, they want to be more transparent, but they want to have access to the public contracts. So generally they are very careful and they don't want to have like an open, clear discussion. So it's good to know that the network avoids confrontation and looks for open discussion. And as for the impact in the public participation, we've seen that with with the IDB and professor from the London School of Economics, we perform an evaluation and they just updated that evaluation on the impact of these public and fiscal transparency policy, and basically they analyze the impact on the country. So this is an analysis that of course we are going to make available to you and for you, and we find every time more evidence that when we have public engagement and transparency, but this engagement with a clear objective, it helps governments to provide more efficient services, and they are able to respond to the needs of the people. For example, Brazil is one of the cases in which we have had this budget engagement, and of course many of the cases, because this is like a meta evaluation and it includes studies as the one that I just mentioned. So we with IDP, within the public participation process, we need to do an evaluation, and as we speak, we are about to finish and the assessment charge of the experience that we have to submit to the donor. So in this case, that is the United States or the Department of State of the United States. Of course, we will be very happy to share it with you. We are going to have a meeting on that, and of the person that is interested on that, of course, you are more than welcome. And just to say something additional here, we have many institutions that are interested on that, that are inviting us to basically evaluate the impact that it has, because we have the procedural impact, we can have also an impact on the budget allocations, as well as something that is related to the civic culture and democracy We have different words for that. And of course, the methodologies are being more interesting now. Under this understanding that that COVID has basically damaged the participation and in something that doesn't have like a direct retribution. So this is something that is very strong now, and we are basically involved in the definition of the parameters as well as in participating and trying to move forward with this work. We made it. Bon appetit. Thank you.